Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Combating Toxic Injustice speaker series. This is the second installment in our series in which we will be discussing the many lives of trash. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that this event is being recorded and that this recording will be added to YouTube and distributed in a follow-up email. My name is Dr. Sya Kedzior, and I'll be moderating the discussion tonight. I am an associate professor of geography and environmental planning at Towson University. I study and I teach about social relationships with waste, environmental movements, and public participation in environmental decision-making. This event series began with the collaboration of faculty and staff from Towson University, UMBC, and Goucher College. But the stories and information shared during these events are rooted in a long history of racial and environmental injustices in our city of Baltimore. We want to acknowledge that grassroots organizers on the front lines who have been fighting for and building a more just Baltimore for an incredibly long time, especially the work in South Baltimore, so close to the Bresco incinerator, and efforts to create a zero waste system in the city. We hope that this panel series will facilitate development of a shared vision for the future and support the work that is happening on the ground right now in Baltimore. As I mentioned, this panel discussion is the second of the event series and features experts from around the Baltimore area who have been invited here to discuss local dynamics of waste management and social and environmental justice. The first hour will be a facilitated dialogue, with the last 30 minutes being reserved for questions from you, the audience, and for closing thoughts from our panelists. During the first hour, please feel free to submit any questions you have using the Q&A tool that you should find at the bottom of your screen. At this time, I want to invite all of our panelists to turn on their video and formally join the panel. Welcome, everyone. We are going to start our conversation off, of course, with some introductions. If our panelists could please let the audience know who you are and explain what your current role is or what organization you represent and what your involvement is in environmental justice and waste management in particular in Baltimore City or County. We are going to take turns and I'll call on each of you in turn. We're looking forward to your introductions and from hearing from each of you tonight. Thank you so much for being here. If I may I ask Leanna to begin with a brief introduction?
Hi, thank you, Sya. Thank you all for inviting me to join you tonight. It's an honor. I am Leanna Hauser. I'm the Waste Reduction and Recycling Manager for Johns Hopkins University. So that means I have direct oversight of the waste infrastructure, operations, education, and programming on the Homewood campus, so our main undergraduate campus. That includes our pretty robust waste reduction and diversion program with standard recycling, composting, surplus furniture, free food alerts, polystyrene and film plastic recycling and all of that jazz. And then recently, this last year, my role expanded to provide technical and programmatic support for our other divisions and campuses throughout Baltimore, Maryland, and DC. And I participate in working groups and committees in Baltimore City, along with some of the folks on this call here. And I'll just point out that so I work for the university and not the hospital. And so we have communications and work with our colleagues at the hospital, but I do not have any influence or control over what happens in their policies and practices there. In terms of environmental justice program, I'll just mention, we work at Homewood, the Homewood campus, and throughout the rest of the university, work to integrate environmental justice into our education, our infrastructure, and our programming. For example, we've changed all of our signs like about 5 years ago to, instead of saying trash, they say incinerate. And we do that just so that people stop and think when they throw their items in the bin that is not recycled or composted, then, it goes somewhere, and that somewhere has public health implications. And we want people to stop and think about that before they throw things away. We frame our presentations in the lens of environmental justice and emphasizing zero waste hierarchy and looking at, the production of goods has just as much, if not more, impact on communities, particularly communities of color and lower-income communities through the production of goods, and hosting webinars, symposiums, engaging in conversations with my friends like Dante and folks at the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. It really does frame environmental justice. Really does frame the work that we do around waste at Hopkins.
Thank you, Leanna, and welcome. Dante, can I ask you next to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, folks. My name is Dante Swinton. I work for an organization called Energy Justice Network as an environmental justice researcher and organizer. Been doing this particular work for about 6 years now, and I've been just making a consistent effort to try to shutter the city's largest polluter, our stationary polluter, our trash incinerator, Wheelabrator, Baltimore. And not only calling out the environmental injustice and its presence, but also advocating for solutions, primarily for zero waste economy, circular economy, that would allow us to not only create a cleaner environment in the way we handle our waste, but also alleviate poverty through the creation of 10 times as many jobs at minimum when you choose to reduce, reuse, compost, recycle, and the like. And when it comes to that, I think there's so much intersection in the city about environmental and economic justice that really should be a critical point that this current administration, Scott administration, moves forward, which I'm optimistic about. And it also plays a role in alleviating crime in the city. And if there's actual economic justice in the city, that's what's going to eliminate it, not a massive police budget. So I'm looking forward to chatting about all this good stuff with the folks on the panel. Thanks.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Next, Logan, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Logan Worsley. I'm the National Coordinator for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Waste and Recycling Division. We're a union of 1.4 million members across North America. Our waste and recycling division has about 32,000 members in the private sector waste and recycling industry. Our division was created largely to try and replicate the zero waste model that was created in San Francisco, through partnering with local community groups and environmentalists to try and create more sustainable models. We've been very successful in Los Angeles in helping create a reformed commercial waste management system. We are seeing we're on the precipice of some really positive changes in New York City with a new system that's being created. And so in addition to just helping we have 150 local unions that represent our waste and recycling members, and a lot of my work is supporting them and the work they do, but we also are always looking for other cities and communities that are interested in creating a new model that's not only more sustainable for the environment and for community groups or the community in general, but more equitable for workers. So Baltimore is a city that we've been following for quite some time. We have thousands of members in Maryland, several hundred in South Baltimore itself. And we've been meeting quite regularly with folks like the South Baltimore Community Land Trust and learning about the work that's being done. And it's incredible what's been done. So really happy to be here. Thanks.
All right, wonderful. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Excuse me. And last, but of course not least, Chaz, can I invite you to introduce yourself?
Surely, I'm Chaz Miller. I actually got my start in garbage and recycling in the mid-'60s when I had a summer job when I was in college at a dude ranch in the Colorado Rockies, where I would collect the trash from the cabins, from the dining room, and from various outbuildings, drive it about 30 miles through Middle Park, Colorado, take it down to the dump in Kremlin, Colorado, where back then the way to handle garbage at least in that part of the world, was to dump it at the edge of an arroyo, set it on fire, and leave. Fortunately, that's quite illegal these days. I was hired by EPA in 1976 to work in its recycling source separation, which was part of the old resource recovery division at EPA. We worked on the original curbside recycling programs in this country, which started out as newspaper only and then added glass and metal bottles. There was no plastic packaging to speak of till probably about the mid 80s. Worked for the glass packaging industry for about 8 years. And then I worked for a quarter of a century at what is now called the National Waste and Recycling Association. There are a lot of different waste related issues, but always doing recycling. I was a member of the District of Columbia Transfer Station Site Selection Advisory Panel in 1999 and 2000 as the district struggled with its problems with transportation and disposal. I recently was the chair of the Montgomery County, Maryland Aiming for Zero Waste Task Force. And our recommendations, which were delivered actually almost a year ago, essentially were aimed at if the county executive was going to go ahead and shut the waste energy facility, which he declared very definitely was what he wanted to do. These were the things he had to do to meet that goal in 2026. And it was a very good set of recommendations, and it was very realistic because you don't just pull the plug and all of a sudden change over. There's a lot of hard work that has to be done to find not only new homes for waste, but also to build up your recycling and your food waste and your other programs. And I was just recently a member of the Baltimore County Solid Waste Group. A longtime member of the Maryland Recycling Network. I'm on its board. I'm on the board of the Northeast Recycling Council. I am semi-retired. I still write my column for Waste 360. I still do speaking gigs, mostly about recycling markets, and do a little bit of consulting. And I'm delighted to be on this panel.
Thank you very much, Chaz, and thanks to each of you for those introductions. Of course, I want to go ahead and get started. I will begin by asking questions to each of the panelists, though I hope to, of course, that we'll bring this together at the end and get a discussion going between all of us. So our first question is for Leanna. I think that it's important to acknowledge that higher education institutions like Johns Hopkins and our sponsors, Towson University, Goucher College, and UMBC are some of the largest waste producers in our region. Can you start this conversation off by explaining how solid waste management at universities is connected to waste management in the Baltimore region? And can you speak on some of the key challenges and maybe opportunities for universities to reduce their waste and support socially equitable solutions to waste?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so universities are, they're like mini cities within a city. We house and feed a lot of people. We conduct pretty resource intensive research. We work to support the academic and research endeavors of our campuses. We host events for the community. We have a lot of people. A lot of people that make a lot of waste. Hopkins specifically is the largest private employer in Maryland. We have 17,000 employees, 26,000 students, and most of them are in Baltimore City. And so we make a lot of waste, and a lot of that waste is processed and disposed of in Baltimore City or in the surrounding communities. And so, I think in terms of, when you are that large and you're contributing that much waste, you're making up a large portion of the waste management for this city and this region. And I think that, the first challenge and opportunity that universities have to address waste and support socially equitable solutions to waste is to first acknowledge that the burden of waste is inequitable and disproportionate. And as a large institution, we need to be responsible for our own waste generation and the disposal of that waste. We need to, look at the research, look at the data. There's a 2019 study that showed that white Americans are exposed to about 17% less air pollution than their consumption causes. White while Black and Latinx Americans bear a pollution burden. Black Americans are exposed to 56% more air pollution than their consumption generates, and Latinx Americans are exposed to 63% more than their consumption generates. And so the more that we can divert, from these facilities, and the less we can consume, and lowering, the burden of the production and the disposal burdens, the better for the health of those most marginalized communities. And so I think the first challenge and opportunity is to just acknowledge it. And then we need to listen. We need to listen to communities that bear that disproportionate burden and understand the concerns and the lived experiences, so that we can work to identify less bad alternatives. Because let's face it, there really isn't any good disposal, whether it's incinerating or landfilling or, paralysis or whatever it is, there are impacts. And so we need to listen to the communities that are bearing those burdens. We need to listen to our researchers in the fields of environmental justice, public health, air and water pollution, to really make informed decisions about what less bad disposal is. But then we need to assess and act. We need to look at, within our own institutions, and we need to do waste audits, track how much waste we're generating, see where it's coming from, identify if we can eliminate or replace it with something that's reusable, recyclable, or compostable. We need to work upstream and with our purchasing departments and contracts, and put the onus back on, the producers to be responsible for the life cycle of their products. And we need to educate our staff and faculty and students to reduce their waste from the start, reuse as much as they can, recycle and compost everything else. And then lastly, collaborate with our peers, our city, our state and city government, and our key stakeholders to share best practices and work collectively towards a just transition to a zero waste campus, city, and world. And, there's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of people, and a lot of backgrounds, and a lot of experiences, and a lot of priorities. And so it is very challenging. But I think, again, like I said, the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that it is inequitable, and that we have a huge role to play in, doing our part, and also working collaboratively with everyone in the area to, work together.
Thank you so much, Leanna. The next question is for Dante. Dante, you work with the Energy Justice Network and have been involved with a number of waste-related environmental and justice issues, including the successful fight against Santee Cooper's proposed coal plant in South Carolina. Can you talk about the connections between waste and race, and why waste and waste management are important environmental justice issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it really tags into a number of the pieces that Leanna brought up when it comes to trash incineration in particular. 80% of the trash incinerators that are still running in this country are primarily located in communities with higher populations of people of color. The same goes for toxic waste sites, landfills, and the like. The higher population of people of color, the more likely folks are going to cite those spaces there. And what I could do is share a link to some of our analysis on that. It provides kind of a graph setup for that, and I'll do that in a little while. But nevertheless, I think that's super important, because now you're basically you're targeting communities that have less political power, less economic power, and in order to be able to push back against being exposed to these ongoing pollutants, to the incessant trash trucks that will come through. And that contributes to the number of nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides and other pollutants for PM 2.5 that will concentrate in these communities and lead to higher rates of asthma, triggering asthma attacks, increasing the lifetime risk of heart disease, stroke, chronic respiratory disease, and the like. And I think a lot of folks will deflect to cars, and absolutely, cars are a huge impact on pollution in communities, especially cities. But what we've done is tried to create or underscore the fact that even if cars are that bad, incinerators and things are also that bad. Your body doesn't say, oh, well, it's an incinerator NOx molecule. So, oh my God, and it's a little bit better. And in terms of annual releases, for example, Wheelabrator emits enough NOx to equal the amount released by 123,000 cars, a little over that. And I think it's about 146,000 cars when we're talking about CO2. And so these types of facilities are a detriment and not a benefit to a community, especially the low-income communities of color where they're primarily located. And so I think it's super critical that any city moving forward in this century, recognizing the impacts of climate change, recognizing the impacts of pollution by incinerators and other toxic sites and other waste sites in general, like medical waste incinerators, which we're host to the largest medical waste incinerator in the country as well, here in Baltimore. So that we need to rethink and immediately reassess and move forward with a much more sustainable approach. And it is far, far cheaper to install the solid waste infrastructure that you would need for zero waste than it would be to maintain the status quo of retrofitting the incinerator, of expanding the landfill. And I would say that it's really important to have municipalities that recognize the need to move on from a facility. In the 10-year solid waste plan that Baltimore County put out in 2019, they indicated that they want to keep using Wheelabrator for as long as possible to save space in their landfill. And if Wheelabrator goes away, then they'll use their landfill, but ideally they don't want to do that. And so to continue contracting with that facility pushes against the need and the actual capacity for cities to move in a different direction. And the same with Baltimore City. We had a chance to move forward with getting out of the new contract and moving on from Wheelabrator sooner than later. And yet our outgoing administration and Mayor Young chose to extend that time. And these are counterintuitive measures to truly put us in a place where we can move towards zero waste. This is not something that's going to have to take 20, 30, 40 years to get to. Multiple cities across the country have installed various policies that have gotten them a more aggressive diversion rates, that have people already with access to bins. And that's the type of stuff that we need to do. So I'm sure there's more that I could bring up, but I'll stop there. And thanks.
Thank you again, Dante. It's really nice in particular too to start identifying some of these cross currents or common themes in each of your responses, and I appreciate that. The next question is for Logan. Logan, you work, of course, on local labor organizing, and have begun conversations with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. How are just futures for Baltimoreans connected to sustainable waste management? How does zero waste or sustainable waste initiatives work in concert with community-led development?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think you can't understate how unjust the current system is. Any system that exists on infrastructure that actively harms and affects the health and economic security of people in one community, that's the definition of injustice. And then, likewise, the current system also isn't just for workers in Maryland or Baltimore. In spite of being the wealthiest state in the country, sanitation recycling workers on average earn poverty wages in Maryland. They earn, I think, 22% less on average than workers in the national average. And in Baltimore, it's 26% less, which, a lot of people are surprised to hear, but that's the unfortunate reality. And this is an industry that's already the fifth most dangerous in the country. It's more dangerous than policing and firefighting. So, how to have I think unfortunately, you can have a more sustainable waste system for the environment, but it may not be just for the communities that live near it or for the workers that operate it and make it work. You can build, you can divert more waste to recycling facilities, and you can, introduce composting and facilities like that. But if it's all still disproportionately affecting, Black and poor communities in one part of the city, that's not going to be just. And similarly, you can create the biggest, most innovative recycling facilities. You can buy, new green trucks that don't pollute. But if the people that are driving those trucks, the people that are operating that equipment, don't have, sustainable wages that can sustain a family, if they don't have affordable health care, if they don't have the ability to organize and collectively bargain without fear of intimidation by management, that's not going to be just. So, I think the real challenge here is getting into the details, and this is kind of like to the second part of your question about how to get there with community involvement. To use an example, I think from my world, if people want to have a union, a lot of times they'll have an election, right? And a lot of times if you win, you might have a feeling of, oh, the work's over. But actually it's just beginning. Like then the work begins of coming together with management and actually hashing out the details of how things will work in this new kind of system where everyone has a voice. And I think in Baltimore, it's kind of like folks won that election, right? In more ways than one. But that really challenging work is only going to continue. And the inertia, unfortunately, will be to, the easy thing to do is to hand things off to industry consultants or to let, waste executives come in and kind of dictate the terms or get a blank check. And it takes constant organizing and constant work, constant discussions like this one to help shape the narrative and hash out the details in a way that really will more equitably, share the costs and benefits of that new system.
Thank you. Turning to the future, exactly which I hope and expect that we'll be able to do in our upcoming conversation. Chaz, you have worked for the National Waste and Recycling Association, the National Recycling Coalition, and the Maryland Recycling Network. You noted in a recent article for Waste 360 that 2020 disrupted many sustainable waste initiatives, from recycling efforts to plastic bag legislation or bans. What challenges and hopefully what opportunities does the pandemic present in relation to waste and waste management? And how do we move forward in 2021 and beyond toward just and sustainable waste futures?
Well, in some ways, the initial reaction to the pandemic was fascinating because one of the quick recognitions was that workers in the waste and recycling industry are essential workers. Absolutely essential for public health reasons on the waste side, and essential for society as a whole on the recycling side. And that was actually kind of gratifying to see that particular reaction. After that, you had some city programs because markets went into flux, and markets have been lousy for recycling for about the last 3 years. Pushback on returnable bags at grocery stores, right, in states that had bag bans. Insistence that you either had to use a plastic bag or do your own bag and in your own reusable bags. Big changes in the waste stream. So many businesses were closed, and a lot of sanitation workers lost their jobs because businesses were closed. If they're closed, you don't have routes. Garbage increased in the residential side. E-commerce took a boost. A lot of corrugated boxes, which meant that now some of your markets were shifting around. Interestingly, now, almost a year after the pandemic, actually it is a year after the pandemic, paper markets are great. They've been very, very solid lately, and they're going to stay that way for some time. We are seeing the highest prices we've ever seen for natural HDPE and for polypropylene for recycling. PET prices are not good, and they haven't responded particularly well. That may or may not change. Unfortunately, we're also seeing the return in the belief of silver bullets. That if we pick one perfect policy, all our problems will go away. And life is a little more complicated than that. And my bet is that a number of people on the call saw the John Oliver show, the recent one he did about plastic, which was a fascinating show for all the inaccuracies, just blatant inaccuracies, the facts twisted out of recognition. And what was the biggest problem with this whole show? His insistence that it is not an individual responsibility. I don't care what kind of recycling program you set up, whether it's deposits, producer responsibility, you name it. It is still up to every single person on this call to put their garbage on the curb and to put their recyclables on the curb and to do it right. And that brings me to something else about the pandemic. I love to hike. I love to hike in DC, in Rock Creek Park. I love to hike on the trails in Montgomery County. What do I see when I'm out hiking? I see masks. What the hell are people doing dropping face masks on a hiking trail? And yet, it's that individual responsibility again. It's that sense that, sooner or later, it's all about us. It's about how well we do it. And we can't lose sight of that. We can't assume that there's some kind of magic bullet out there that's going to resolve everything. And I think we've got to be very ruthlessly realistic about what programs can resolve and how long it will take. In Montgomery County, because it's very clear that the current county executive wants to turn off the burner in 2026, and he has every right to take that policy. But the Aiming for Zero Waste Task Force did not choose to comment on that. We were more interested in, if that's where we're going, how do we get there? And the next 4 years, the county has a lot of work to do. We're at 40% recycling now. We need to get higher. We need to get to the 50s. The highest recycling goal in this country is out in Seattle at 60%. It's actually about 58, 55%. We need to get smart about this stuff. We need to get the programs moving. We have to make some key decisions now, and then accept the fact that it's going to take a while for them to play out. Which sort of brings me to my last point. One thing, if anything, I've learned in recycling, patience is a virtue.
All right, well, thank you very much, Chaz. There's been some very interesting and different ideas going around here about the future and what the future could look like, what it might look like, and what it could take for us, for people in general, to get towards a zero waste future, towards a more equitable future, towards a future where sustainable waste development and positive community outcomes, community development, go hand in hand. I'd like to turn our focus a little bit to the question of the future and what an equitable, just, and sustainable future could look like, hopefully will look like in Baltimore. And particularly, I'd really like to hear each of the panelists' ideas about what changes need to occur in order to make that future a reality. This is a question, of course, for all of our panelists, and I'm hoping that it can get us started because we do have a good amount of time until we open the floor for Q&A. I'm hoping it can get us started in a broader conversation about, challenges and opportunities, and also perhaps this question of I don't know if I would use the term sort of responsibility, but this idea that again, community development, just futures, and waste management can move forward together and work towards common goals. So I open up questions or discussions to anyone on the panel who might want to jump in on this.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really happy that we have the collection of folks that we have on the panel, getting some diverse perspectives on this. I will say, though, that I feel like the time has been, we should have been doing this. When it comes to the recycling markets, the reason why they plummeted is because we depended so much on exporting our waste to other countries. And so instead of bothering to localize this management, we sat on it, and we sat and we sat and we sat and we didn't do anything. And so, and actually dealing with the material locally and installing policies that would require more local reuse, and putting out RFPs for various types of facilities. So composting facilities, for example, where there's never been a real effort to create municipal composting here in Baltimore. There also was never a real effort to recycle in Baltimore. For the longest, the city charged for its recycling bins. It's still charging for its recycling bins. It charges $12 for a bin that's about a third the size of the trash can. It has maintained this visual that everything we need to dispose should be burned. And so when you have a municipality that has chosen to maintain a very classist and racist perspective on waste management, then yes, it is going to take a little bit longer to deal with the material that we have. But at the same time, we also don't have to just sit on it and act as if it's going to take into the next decade to be able to affect change. It doesn't take that long to build a material recovery facility. There are multiple entities that provide additional funding for municipalities to create that. We finally have a victory in that the city's about to roll out universal recycling bins for free that are the same size as the trash cans, which should have happened a long time ago. But there's been this ongoing perception that everything we should throw out should just go to the incinerator, or if it doesn't get there, it goes to the landfill, or it goes as ash to the landfill from the incinerator. So I have to challenge this idea that we cannot be more aggressive about the way that we move this city forward when there are plenty of other cities that have seen their rates increase simply from the access as well as the general education. There are also policies like pay as you throw that multiple communities around the country have that drastically decrease their recycling, their trash rates rather, and increase their recycling rates because you make recycling free and also provide free access for compost use and pickup, as opposed to having this trash that's ultimately going to go to some sort of disposal, whether it is the incinerator at the moment or to the landfill. And it's still safer to deal with the material in stabilized landfills than it is to burn it. And so we have to be honest about the way that the system has been set up. And I feel like there's a lot of conversation that often goes on in municipalities that is not honest about those components of what has led to this current situation in which we're like, all right, well, if this incinerator goes away, where will all the trash go? Oh, we'll be swimming in trash. There's just all this madness. And I have to, there's other things that I can add, but I just felt like there's a need to have that as a baseline and recognizing the fact that we are in a space where multiple municipalities, not just the individual, have failed to get us in a direction that prepares us for zero waste in a much more aggressive fashion.
Dante, I'm really glad that you brought up sort of the locality and really bringing our, waste disposal, recycling, all of these options closer. The farther away that, we push away our production and our disposal and even our recycling and other processing of our waste, the more disconnected we are from it. And generally those, where we're pushing it, either the production or the disposal or the processing is in communities where we don't see it, we don't know about it, and therefore we can't advocate against it and make it better. And so I think, in terms of a sustainable waste future, it is where we are, as much as possible, generating what we need within, some sort of local space, whether it's, growing our food in our cities and composting that food in our cities and in our neighborhoods, or having, production as close to our, communities as possible, and our, waste processing or our materials processing instead of waste, processing those materials into, more viable, reusable products, in doing it in a way that's safe for the workers in those environments, that's safer, that's equitable, that's, just and provides, real wages for the people that are doing that essential work, as Chaz pointed out. We saw that with the pandemic. These are individuals who've, been forgotten about. And people were up in arms when they stopped collecting recycling in Baltimore and realized that, if they're not there, then, they get angry. And I think, you know, the closer that people are connected and can see that on a daily basis, then I think that trickles up into, okay, well, yes, I'm recycling, but what can I be doing more? What should I be doing more? And it's sort of part of your daily thought process. And I think that, you know, in terms of what Chaz was speaking about, I think, you know, yes, we all do have individual responsibility. We have the choice to sort our waste. We have the choice to, you know, not use a plastic bag, or all of these individual choices that we have. But, you know, we still have limited control when we go up the zero waste hierarchy. You know, recycling and composting is really at the bottom, and it's really the last place that we should be resorting to. And so I think everybody has some role to play, and whether it is the individual level, whether it's the institutional level, like Hopkins, where we have lots of resources to, you know, do research and kind of galvanize our, you know, our community and our peers, and, you know, working with my friends at Goucher and Towson and UMBC and other schools in the region. And then, you know, continuing to work our way up, you know, to the point where we're looking at, you know, production and design of materials. You know, like if a company designs a material that's not recyclable, well, then my individual responsibility isn't squat, because I can't recycle it. It can't be recycled. So I think we all have a role to play. And I think that, you know, we just need to make sure that at every step and every of that process, we are, you know, pushing people to take their own responsibility and their own accountability for what they have control over.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about, you know, how to get there, you know, as you know, things are going to be, new systems are going to be created, you know, new infrastructure, new programs. You know, I think accountability and transparency is going to be critical for, you know, to end up with a positive result. And, you know, if the city ends up doing, you know, a lot of the work, that means accountability and transparency from city agencies as to what they're doing, what their goals are, and why they're doing this and that, staying on top of it and understanding those programs and the details. If things end up getting outsourced, you know, say waste management takes over a MRF in the city. Again, it can't be a situation where they just get a blank check. They're, you know, cities have an incredible amount of leeway as to what can be put in those agreements with those cities. There's a great report put out by a group called In the Public Interest on best practices in waste contracting. And you know, there are so many ways that cities can really protect themselves from situations where, you know, trash isn't getting picked up, where you know, companies aren't following labor laws or safety laws, or violating safety, you know, making safety violations, that kind of thing. But again, it all, you know, companies aren't going to do that on their own. Politicians aren't going to do that on their own, because it's not the easy way, right? Inertia is going to lead them to the easiest way, which is to just hand things off and pay no mind, whether that's to a bureaucrat or whether that's to a corporation. So yeah, I mean, to get to that place where things are more equitable, it just takes all of these conversations, this work, organizing. It just has to keep going on and on.
You know, one or two real quick thoughts. Comment was made actually earlier about exports. In fact, exports were never more than, have never been the primary place where we send our recyclables. Exports of PET and HDPE have steadily declined since 2010, year after year after year. Exports to China have been declining and now are cut off, but interestingly are going to other countries. But they never got above about 35% of all the paper that we were sending out. Bit of a myth there on exports. The good side is there's more jobs being created in this country through new demand in this country to make things. But those are factories, and those are sited primarily in rural areas, but not exclusively. Garbage is a dangerous business, and the biggest danger to garbage workers are other drivers on the road. The drive-by deaths is an absolute scandal in our society. What do we do about that? How do we make those guys, it's safer for those guys? That's a key problem in the industry that has to be dealt with. You're absolutely right in terms of better contracting. But at the same time, as MRFs evolve, and it takes about, right now, 1 to 2 years to build a new MRF, assuming you have a site, they're becoming more and more automated. They're getting the increase in the automation of the MRF, the sophisticated the equipment. And the reality is that automation replaces jobs. How do we deal with that? What's the answer to that? Part of the reason for the automation is it's safer. It takes the hazard out of the jobs. It does not eliminate all of the jobs, but it does eliminate some. There's some very serious questions that have to be grappled with as we go through this. If I had the answers, I'd be happy to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many pieces to it, as we've talked about. But to that point, yeah, it only takes a year or two to build out a new MRF. That MRF is cheaper than the expansion of the landfill here in Baltimore. That's cheaper than the installation of NOx controls on the incinerator, which they refused to do when we passed the Baltimore Clean Air Act in 2019. Like, the infrastructure itself, the capital costs are far cheaper than the build out of existing status quo facilities. So beyond any sort of impacts from the export aspect, not to say that everything was exported, just that part of it was, there's still a need for greater localization of that material and to facilitate the creation of repair shops, to facilitate the creation and management of glass in the local level. Glass is 100% recyclable, but nationally, it's only recovered about 27%, and that's according to the EPA. So in a single stream system, as we currently have set up, you're ultimately going to end up with a larger amount of contamination. The theory is that you're going to get more material out of a single stream than you would in a multi-stream, but that glass ultimately gets downcycled into landfill cover or road construction. That's not maximizing the value. So to Leanna's point, there are so many levels of responsibility that need to be handled. And again, the municipalities have failed to do so. They've leaned on this cradle to grave system for the longest, and they have not tried to adjust. And as I said, I personally have been working in this arena for 6 years. We tried as many times as possible, years out from the contract needing to be renewed with the incinerator, to speak to this aspect, to speak to the benefits of moving towards zero waste when it comes to jobs, when it comes to air pollution reduction, and the like. With some automations or not. Even with that automation, there's still more jobs produced in a MRF than there would be in an incinerator, as well as the actual collection of that material separate from trash and what have you. And the same for composting. More jobs are created in composting than incineration. So even with any sort of automation, we're still benefiting the economy far greater than we would in a current system. Even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in their Beyond 34 campaign states that a 70% diversion rate nationwide could unlock $4.5 trillion to the national economy by 2030, simply because we have shifted the way that we handle our waste. I can send the link for that report, but I mean, even the Chamber of Commerce recognizes that this sustainable circular economy makes far more sense from a jobs aspect, from a pollution aspect. So we can't act as if that the answers have not been there, but we have acted as if we don't want to do them. And that's a major problem with the way that things have been structured in Baltimore and Detroit and Newark, where there have been various incinerators in communities of color. And again, there is a massive classist and racist component to the siting of these facilities and to the entrenching of these facilities in communities. And right now, for example, Hartford needs to redo their incinerator in order for it to be anywhere close to efficient. And it would cost them $333 million to do. They've backed out of the idea of retrofitting it because it's way too expensive. You could build out the infrastructure you need that is sustainable for far cheaper. So the funding is out there. Multiple foundations provide funding for cities. You can obviously reallocate funding out of certain places. Obviously, the police budget here in Baltimore to do this stuff. We just need the political will. It is, you can include some individuals, but it is a municipal political will and a state political will and a federal political will to do this stuff. It can't just be based all the way down to the individual. Systems have to change, and you have to be more aggressive about that systems change. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. And if you do, it's going to be too late. So I think that's super critical to understand.
Actually, I don't think there's any much real disagreement there. Obviously, if you're recycling, if you're composting, you're avoiding disposal. That's kind of a no-brainer. You can quibble over the number of jobs created. We can disagree over the impact on the economy, but it's a no-brainer if you're using materials. And environmentally, that's where you get all the environmental benefit. It's by avoiding the extraction. It's about eliminating that part. But again, it takes a while to get there. San Francisco, 50% recycling rate is what they really have. Garbage is increasing in San Francisco every year since 2012. The city dropped its zero waste goals very, very quietly in 2018 or 2019. It's keeping an eye on what's achievable and making sure these programs work. We have dual stream in Montgomery County. And what that means, and I love dual stream, that was the first thing the Aiming for Zero Waste group voted on, was to support continuing in dual stream. Dual stream means we have beautiful paper to sell. But it also means the glass and the cans and the plastic all get mixed up together, and we have to deal with unmixing them. We still have the same problems with broken glass in dual stream as we do in single stream. That's why deposits help, because they take that stuff out of the system. You don't worry about them anymore. It's that kind of thinking we need to start having. We need to thinking, how do we make these into real end products that have markets? Otherwise, what's the point?
I mean, that's how you create those jobs, right? You know, yeah, I'm quite familiar with automation. I mean, we've seen so many jobs already disappear with the move to automated side loaders, you know, trucks, and getting away from, you know, having helpers on the trucks to having one person in the cab. And you've seen thousands of jobs across the country disappear. And I don't unfortunately have a way to solve that, but how do we create that economy that in America that has those processing facilities, manufacturing facilities that can then create that end product that's usable, and at the same time, hopefully those would be good jobs as well. That's a challenge that's beyond my pay grade, but I'm glad there's smart people talking about it.
Almost forgot to unmute myself there. So if I may step out of my panel, or if I may step out of my moderator role a little bit and pose a question to the panel in the last few minutes that we have before we transition to audience Q&A. I've been taking notes and noticing, again, there's a lot of cross currents. There's a lot of really interesting things coming up. But something I keep hearing from all of our panelists tonight is, in different forms, questions about political will, questions about the will and the buy-in from, whether we're talking about the person on the street who's putting a recycling bin out, whether we're talking about a municipal government who's making decisions, whether we're talking about an academic institution. These are all very different actors, and each of them very different responsibilities, but also very different abilities to enact change, to do something different, to affect the system. But something I keep hearing is, there doesn't seem to be this political will to have this conversation. We don't want to talk about these things. I think that we have a relationship with waste, really broadly speaking, not just here in Baltimore, but beyond, where we rely on this system that enables people and institutions that create waste to not think about these things. And I think this is one thing that you mentioned, Logan, was, this concern that municipalities will pass the buck, that they'll subcontract out, and that this lack of political will, this desire to avoid the unappeasing subject, this topic that people don't like to think about. Where do these things go when we throw them out? What does it say about us that we throw things out in the first place? So I think the question I'm asking is, how do we get, whether we're talking about individual people or institutions or government officials, to think more and talk more and do more about these possibilities, these possible relationships with waste?
I mean, I think, like, earlier I was thinking about, we were talking about products and, recyclability and local versus, global. And, really what it comes down to is there needs to be more conversation. There needs to be more collaboration. There needs to be more coordination. When we're talking about, the zero waste hierarchy, we're talking about this long spectrum of opportunity within all of those places. And you can't have people redesigning things without talking to people who are going to handle it at the end, or people who are going to consume it and use it. And will they, so will they use it? Will they, will it be recyclable? Can a compost facility accept it? Do they want it? I think that, that's just one piece of where people have to acknowledge that they're not the sole actor and that they have to work with others. And I think the other piece when it comes to political will is sometimes I think we just all need to accept the fact that we're not perfect and we make mistakes, and we have to come to the table acknowledging that, we all need to do the work. And, when it comes to, an institution like Hopkins or another university, we have to, acknowledge where our resources lie and where, we can influence, whether it be educating these, 26,000 people that work in our institutions and the 17,000 students, or the other way around, of the thousands, let's just say thousands of people that work in our institutions. What's our role in educating them? What's our role in giving them the resources to dedicate their research to be the engineers of the future that can redesign things, or be the public health professionals who look at issues of environmental justice and disproportionate, air quality and those kinds of things. And I think that that's where our role lies. We can help, pull together our peers that are these huge waste generators, and where are the opportunities where we can work together and collaborate, what are our strengths, but just acknowledging that we don't have the answers. We need to work with other people, we need to collaborate, and that's the only way I think that we're going to make any kind of impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are more cities and individuals within those leadership structures that register a need to change. Obviously, as I mentioned with Hartford, they at least have some cognizance that they do not need to maintain what is already an aging incinerator. I wish that our outgoing mayor had done the same here. But it's also still very probable that it shutters before the end of this contract anyway, since it's already 36 years old. But I think it's important not only for folks like myself as an organizer and researcher and all that to engage the city, but also for universities to speak to this aspect and to with their extra influence in the community to underscore the need to go in a different direction. And so if there are industries or universities that are still utilizing Wheelabrator, then to push back against the usage of Wheelabrator is super important. As well as any other businesses that are local that happen to depend on it. I mean, and the thing is that, and for here, it's Baltimore City and Baltimore County, the two main sources of material that go to that facility. Both those municipalities need to have more engagement of folks that are advocating for zero waste, for businesses across the country that are building out this type of infrastructure to save cities money and to provide this greater synergy on getting us in a different direction. Again, I think that, for example, the way that one of the consultants that the city hired projects out, it'll take a good 20-something years before Baltimore can hit 80% or 90% diversion from landfills and incinerators. I do not believe that's accurate. I believe that's slow walking the things that we actually could do. And so there needs to be not only an engagement of folks on the ground that are doing this research, but also consistent outreach to industries that are already working on this and could help in pushing the city to reach a higher diversion rate. I mean, our residential recycling rate is only 15%, and it's because of the dependence of incineration in this city. And there's just no escaping that. We have to understand the longer we wait on this incinerator, to keep as its primary source of waste disposal, the longer it will take for us to move in a different direction. And so now, fortunately, on the mayor's advisory committee, we were able to recommend the commitment to zero waste. We were able to recommend the components that are needed to be installed to go in that direction. The city council passed the Fair Development Plan for Zero Waste as a resolution last summer or the summer before. Which runs a lot more aggressive than the Less Waste Better Baltimore plan that DPW's consultant hired. And so we need a mayor to say which side he's going to go on. Are we going to slow walk this, or are we going to be a little more aggressive, which is what we ought to do. So I think the pressure is building in the city, as well as other communities that are dealing with incinerators. Detroit's incinerator closed in 2019 because of that type of pressure. So, I mean, this is ongoing. It's continuing to go in the direction that we need it to go. It just needs to go faster, and utilizing the various institutions that have various impact and influence in the city are super critical. So Hopkins Hospital, Hopkins Homewood, all the universities that are involved in this particular event, like, the more they speak to this, the faster we will be able to get folks to buy in our municipal governments, and that's what we really need right now.
Maybe that's a good opportunity then for us to transition to some of the audience questions that are coming in through our Q&A portal. And again, I'd like to invite everyone in our audience to post questions for the panel. Most of these aren't directed towards any particular panelists, but they pick up, of course, on the themes that we've been discussing as a group. So there's one question that's come in here. If we know that recycling or composting is more cost effective, if we know that these alternative solutions are more cost effective, that they're better for the local economy, that they extend lives of landfills, creates a healthier and more just environment, why isn't it mandated for residential, commercial, and institutional generators?
I'll just say real quickly that sorry, Chaz. One of the things that is a big issue for Baltimore right now is that we've been dependent on waste management as our recycling contractor. There's a facility down in Elk Ridge that went from charging, I think, maybe something $20 a ton up to like $100 a ton to process. And for Baltimore, obviously, that's going to be more money to give to an entity like waste management. So what we have been advocating for is either the ownership or co-ownership, public-private partnership type of situation of a localized MRF that actually would save us money and allow us to benefit from cleaner materials that are recovered more locally. In terms of the mandates, there are multiple cities that have landfill bans of organics, that have electronics bans and the like, and actually have set up the systems and continue to provide the education aspect. That's one thing that the city's also failed at, that there's never been a real education effort on moving towards zero waste either. So those are the two pieces in particular that really need to happen to move forward. But I do support the idea of these like requirements once we've decided to commit to getting the bins out to everyone, to the education aspect. And then once everyone has a recycling bin, hopefully they ultimately get composting bins as well. And then having these drop-off points, as Chaz had mentioned, to divert some extra materials away and keep some of the stuff out to minimize contamination. Then that is where we can start installing more of these bans and stuff, because now the system is actually established for folks to avoid putting everything in the trash can and go to the incinerator. But sorry to step on your toes there, Chaz. Sorry.
You didn't at all. Actually, pretty much said what I would have said with you know, the state of Maryland is close to passing a mandatory food waste, food residual requirements for larger generators and institutions, which would include Johns Hopkins. It's passed both houses. It still needs, so they need to work out some details between bills. Dude, that's all great stuff. You need to make these things mandatory, but at the same time, you got to have markets for the materials. If you don't have a place to take the food waste, which is what Montgomery County is grappling with, we got the money in the budget to do food waste pilot programs. We got the trucks, they're starting up the programs. Where are we going to take it? Well, right now we're going to take it over to Prince George's to their facility and it'll be composted there. But that facility is not big enough for all of Montgomery County's food waste. So where do we put it? Potentially it can go where we currently do the yard waste composting, which is right next to the Dickerson facility. But there's going to be some buy-in issues with the neighbors because the reality is food waste does decompose. And it decomposes, there are inevitable orders. So those have to be controlled. But hey, I'm all for mandates, but there's got to be a plan for what you do with the banned material.
Okay, thank you both. I think that feeds well into another question that we have from our audience here. Again, not directed to any panelist in particular. So the question is, when considering recycling, how do we account for the fact that a lot of our waste goes to landfills in low-income countries, is what this audience member has posted. I think I would also add, or low-income communities. How do we fix this? How do we encourage recycling in our communities? And the question is in particular about whether recycling is just being trashed somewhere else.
First of all, most recyclables are not trashed somewhere else. The markets are there. Most garbage, very little garbage goes out of the country. That is not to say there are not some unscrupulous companies who have put garbage in bales of recyclables. I've seen it, but that should not be allowed. That's simply wrong, ethically, morally, you name it, it's wrong. But it doesn't happen that often for a whole variety of reasons, one of which is it's very expensive to ship trash overseas. It just doesn't work. But you still have to come up with the places to take it. You're absolutely right. The data is very clear about where many of these facilities are located. This is what we grappled with in the district when I was on the transfer station siting panel. There's very little space in the district that's actually zoned for industrial use for a transfer station. Probably 90% plus of it was located along the railroad lines in the district, because the district has never had industrial facilities to speak of. That forced the district to look elsewhere. And elsewhere, that becomes the question. How do you make sure that's a safe place? How do you make sure that is not going to negative impact upon communities of color?
I mean, I think a lot of our recycling is getting trashed because it's not acceptable. It's not recyclable. There's no market for it. I think that there's a lot of confusion. I think that there was I'm a fan of dual stream as well. Chaz. We have been doing dual stream at Homewood since the early beginning days of recycling, and I resisted the urge, or the pressure to switch to single stream because, it makes for a low quality product. And in order for us to we don't want to downcycle things. We want to recycle things into, their highest best use. And I think that the problem is that, we all wanted we wanted to make it easy for people to recycle. And when we made it easy for people to recycle, we didn't educate them well enough, or we thought that certain kinds of convenience materials, particularly plastics, were recyclable, and they're just not. There's no market for it. They're not, the value isn't high enough for MRFs to take them. So, when we do waste audits at Hopkins, we were finding people were looking at the chasing arrows, that's what it says. It says recycling. Why can't I put it in the recycling bin? And that's the question you always get. Well, but it says recycling. It's like, yes. And so, I really tried to move from saying something's recyclable to it's acceptable, because there's a huge difference between recyclable and acceptable wherever you go, between, Baltimore City or Hopkins or Baltimore County or Montgomery County or California. And so I think that, that is a big challenge in that, a lot of it is getting trashed because it's not acceptable. There's no market for it. And I think, as recycling managers, my job is to really educate people on that and really focus on recycling the right materials. And then how do we avoid using the materials that don't have a market? And again, that goes right back up that hierarchy of the design. If you're going to design a material and you're going to put a recycling symbol on it, you better well make sure that the recycling facility is going to take it. And if they won't take it, then we need to refigure how we can make things that actually do have an end market, because it's very confusing. My family, I feel like I'm an embarrassment when my family doesn't even know how to recycle properly, because it is that confusing. I just think that that just breeds mistrust in the whole system when people think, well, I'm trying to recycle, but it's not going anywhere. But they believe in that recycling. They believe in those chasing arrows. And unfortunately, that's just not the case, because recycling is a business.
Now, what you're referring to is the resin identification code in particular, which is, I think, a scam. It was done in 1988. I suspect the reason the arrows were put on it was because somebody had an idea that this would make it look good. What it primarily did was make it look very misleading. It's going to be very hard to get those labels changed, because they're law in 38 states. It will probably require a federal effort that will override the state laws, which may or may not be a Commerce Clause violation, I'm not sure. But it has to go. It's grossly misleading. And I hope that maybe in the next session of the Maryland legislature, the state will abolish it. This was, as you know, an extremely busy session this year, so it just didn't rise as something to be done, but that's got to go.
Yeah, I mean, just to the point of things circling back to or going ultimately into landfills and incinerators, what happens with our recycling at the Recycle America site for waste management in Elkridge is we send the material there. If it cannot be marketed, it gets shipped back to the incinerator. And that's just the way it's been. And the fact that we've not structured our system in a more sustainable way is a huge part of that. I would say that there was another thing that was on my mind and now it's gone. Yeah, in terms of plastics, I think one of the biggest things is that we have to make sure that the federal government and state governments commit to more extended producer responsibility laws when it comes to plastic production and actually getting the resins that will be most valuable for us to recover. And one of the main reasons incinerators like to proclaim themselves as cleaner than landfills when it comes to climate change is that they disregard any sort of biogenic or organic CO2 that comes from the burning of that material. But they assume that because you wouldn't be burning it, you have to bury it. So they disregard the idea of composting anaerobic digestion completely. They assume that just everything goes there, it'll break down, the methane will be produced, which is far more potent than CO2, and that's why we're better. And so they want people to continue to feel that way, and give that reason for why they are renewable when they in fact aren't. So I think that there are multiple pieces of being able to navigate this, but there are zero waste hierarchies. There's an international one that completely removes landfilling. The waste hierarchy that the EPA has still has incineration as better than landfill. But again, that's because they're disregarding the biogenic CO2 that incinerators produce, in addition to all the additional pollutants that come out of a smokestack. So multiple levels of policy shifts are needed to be able to get to a point where we can maximize the value of everything, to Leanna's point, but also, again, to incentivize the localization of glass recovery, of metal recovery, and the like, is the job creator. We can't just sit and wait for the market. We could create the market. There are plenty of uses for this material that could be utilized in this city. And we haven't even spoken about like construction and demolition waste and the need for deconstruction policies, because that's another major component of our waste in Baltimore as well. And we don't have any deconstruction mandates in the city. So I'm all for that type of stuff needing to be installed, so that way we actually can facilitate this. We don't have to wait for a giant business to do it. We can make these things happen locally if we just think a little bit outside the box of these status quo systems.
I can't stop smiling because it's so exciting and wonderful for me to be here with people who are as passionate as I am, or who are so passionate about talking about waste and spending your evening doing this. We are getting a bunch of really good audience questions flooding in. Some are really specific and referencing some of the materials that a few of you mentioned earlier. And if you would share those links either with the audience or with us, and we can distribute them to the audience after the event, that would be really helpful. Unfortunately, we're getting a little bit short on time, and so I think we only have time for a final question before we wrap up for the evening. And so one of the questions that came through is, as paying customers of the city's waste system, can universities and other large institutions, and I'll point out, and all the others of us that pay in one way or another for the city's waste system, can these universities, can these large institutions use their power and their influence to place more pressure on the city to offer better services, was the original wording. I'll add to that, or to explore these alternative options, or to shut down Wheelabrator. Can our institutions do that? How might we do that?
I guess I'm the obvious one to answer that. And I'll preface this by saying I can't answer that. So that is possible. It's way above my pay grade. I will say that in my role at Johns Hopkins, we have had conversations about where our waste should go. We are trying to do independent research. We are reaching out to our colleagues that are experts in the field to say, if not Wheelabrator, where? And so currently we don't have that answer. I would love for somebody to tell me that. And we could make some changes based on data and based on the community. What I will say I can do, and what our university is committed to, is again to focus our efforts on upstream and reducing all of the waste that we're generating, all of the production of goods that can have, significant greenhouse gas emissions and in other, public health and environmental justice impacts. I think if the city, if we were approached, or if we had alternative options, we would absolutely weigh those options very seriously. And I just personally and professionally have not been able to identify or have somebody identify for me what that alternative is currently. And so we're happy to be part of the conversations, whether within the municipal, city government, and with our community partners to identify, what that alternative is, and support it.
I think anytime there's more voices calling for change, the better. And even if it's not as simple as a university just hiring a different contractor, they still have a huge voice with electeds, with decision makers for a number of different reasons. And I think it always just comes back to organizing and people having these kinds of conversations, sharing knowledge, sharing. I've had a lot of conversations with folks across the country, and it's always amazing what you know and what you don't know, and what other people know. The inclination so often is to just go out and do it yourself, but you never succeed that way. And so, organizing, trying to work together, more voices for change. That's how you get there. One of the biggest challenges is just trying to figure out how it all works, which is different everywhere. And half of the battle is just trying to figure that out. So, yeah.
I was going to say, with that, I think I really have to acknowledge each of you and your work in this area. We want, of course, to be mindful of our scheduled time for the evening. And so it's that time of the night, as much as I would like to stay here and talk about these issues longer. It's that time of the night, and it's time to wrap up our discussion. I would like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to share any closing remarks that you might have with the audience. I'll follow the same order that we did with the introductions and ask Leanna to share any of your closing remarks first.
Well, it's such an honor to be on this panel with such, amazing partners in this work. And I'm thrilled that I'm thankful for Goucher and UMBC and Towson for hosting, and for all of the attendees. I think that, really, we just all have to continue to, be in the work together and acknowledge that we all have a role to play, and we just can't give up. And so thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you on the next time we're either in person or on Zoom talking about this, because we're not going away.
Thank you. Dante, do you have a few closing remarks?
I saw in the Q&A about strategies to move forward with the shuttering of the incinerator, and absolutely, obviously, for it should be done. The current contract ends at the end of this year. We shouldn't have extended it. We have a landfill in the city. They both came online at the same time. The existing cells reach capacity theoretically by 2026. That's under the assumption that we do things the way we're doing it. But if we closed it, we would have a few years to utilize the existing space, while the city has already permitted to expand the landfill for any materials that we wouldn't be able to recover through composting and recycling. As Chaz and I brought up, it doesn't take very long to build out a MRF. You could build one the size of San Francisco. It's 450,000 ton capacity. You could build out a composting facility for 180,000 ton capacity. There are businesses that we've spoken to that are willing to engage the city on that. In fact, the city released an RFI request a few weeks ago, and we got one of those composting facilities to reach out to them and say, hey, you know, we could build the facility, just give us 180,000 tons of organic waste. And we got plenty of that. So, so that's 630,000 tons right there. And it would not take them very long to build the facility either. And then obviously with the rollout of these bins, again, since everyone had such a disjointed system, having that's going to matter as well in building out an additional capacity to divert from the incinerator and from the landfill. So it can be done. We can't sit and think that, oh, it's a pipe dream and this, that, and the other. We've crunched the numbers. We've looked at the possibilities that can actually be established if we are aggressive about zero waste. And so I'm very optimistic that Mayor Scott will move in that direction. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Logan, some closing comments from you.
Yeah, I mean, first, just thank you for inviting me, inviting, you know, organized labor to have a voice here. You know, so often I feel like we either go it alone in our own silo, or we, you know, aren't included in the conversation. So it's great to be here. And I really appreciate that, you know, folks, you know, shedding light on you know, the actual people that make our waste management systems operate, and it's incredibly difficult and dangerous work. And the more that we can do to help them make their lives better, it benefits everybody. So thank you very much for having us, and happy to be a part of any further conversations.
Thank you, of course, as well. And finally, Chaz.
Sorry about that. I think the good news is that local governments, cities and counties are going to be getting some good money from the stimulus bill. And I think local governments are just actually starting to realize the benefits they're going to be getting. It's going to be financially very helpful. I think it will allow governments to work on their priorities and to look through their financing a little more successfully, because some of the pressure will be off, at least for the next year or two. On the downside, it's interesting that the three jurisdictions mentioned here, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Montgomery County, where I live, are all faced with, if we're going to, where do we send our waste? And how much do we send when we figure out where we're going to send it? I know that in Montgomery County, we're, I think, making some very good strides toward increasing our recycling rate, to focusing on what we're doing very badly on, which is food waste in particular. But we're not going to be able to recycle it all overnight, and the county has to resolve that decision of where to in the future. And I hope they do it with an understanding of where it goes.
Well, again, thank you, Chaz, and thank you all. I'll direct the attention of our audience members to the chat, where we have shared some of the resources that our panelists mentioned over the course of the evening. I'll wrap up with a few final comments. In Baltimore and beyond, the current pandemic is challenging efforts to reimagine social relationships with our waste and to implement some of the more sustainable waste solutions that we've talked about this evening. Dealing with waste equitably, creatively, and sustainably is a vital component of achieving social and environmental justice. It is important, therefore, that we push forward with these conversations and that they help to spark and support real systemic change. It's crucial that we champion solutions backed and created by communities on the front lines of environmental justice. I will remind you that our third and final panel event of this series is on Thursday, April 22nd at 6 p.m. It will focus on such community-led solutions from grassroots organizers in Baltimore, and we hope that you can join us. Our panel organizers will make sure to send a follow-up email with the recording of this event and links to register for upcoming events as well. Again, finally, thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your insights tonight, to our audience members for your participation and your excellent questions, and thank you to the many organizations that sponsored this event. We are going to close out here. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and thank you again.